In our work in the relational space, Jennifer and I, we absolutely have an incredible time with our clients because we get into their lives and ask questions that really nobody else will ask them. Like, when's the last time somebody said, "How do you rate your faith?" Or if you had to score your family, how would you score your family? Let's talk about your finances. How well you doing there, debits and credits, inflow, outflow. Let's talk about your career, whether you're the CEO of the company or the CEO of the house, as many wives are. Then there's a whole idea of fitness that isn't even part of your daily gym routine. It's actually a 360 view of your overall health. And then, we're such a busy culture that friendships get left behind, but nobody talks about it. In fact, I was just on a 2-mile mountain hike with my buddy this morning, and we were talking through some of these things. Who do we have real conversations with? And then the byproduct of so much of that is fun, which typically is bypassed because we're all so busy building careers, raising kids, running to soccer games, basketball games, and every other club sport our kids can be involved in. So we call those life 7Fs. And what I want to do is slow down and come through the portal of that tool called Life 7Fs and hit on each one of them and unpack them just a little bit. So faith, what's so interesting about faith is most people say, "Oh, I can't believe you and Jennifer talk about faith." Because it's such a taboo in our culture. Faith in politics, you just don't talk about at the family dinner table. Where we dive headfirst into these topics. And what people don't understand is we're not challenging or asking people to score my faith, my persuasion, the church I sit in on Sundays. We're asking people to score their faith structure and their belief. And what I think we forget is there is research out there that shows how much our faith structure influences our life. And whether you're Jewish, whether you're Catholic, whether you're evangelical, whether you're Muslim, the fact of the matter is faith is a huge foundation builder for who you are across your entire lifestyle. And so faith becomes important to us, and we hit that right off the bat. It's the very first one, and it has created more conversations that are unexpected than I think any other of the 7Fs. So faith, a quick story around faith is we had a client where the wife was raised in one faith persuasion and the husband was raised in the other. And the family really leaned to the father's persuasion. And what it did is it actually created conflict that was unspoken because nobody knew how to address it. And so what we got to do is step into that conversation and say, how do we meet in the middle? Is there really a right or wrong? Or is it just a preference? And should anybody, not just we, but should anybody feel judged inside their faith space? And what it did is it created an ongoing conversation. The kids ended up getting involved too. And the bottom line is they realized that by not being connected in the faith space, it created an underlying disruptor inside the family construct. So faith, hugely important. And I just challenge everybody to look at your faith and on a daily basis, think through, how am I doing in this area? Because it's so, so important. And then we move to family, which is really the biggest juggernaut of all 7Fs. Because we don't just talk about the family generically, we talk about the family individually. So with our clients, and again, this works for families of wealth, it works for the Garcia family. If you actually list out those people in your family, your kids, your in-laws, sometimes aunts and uncles, those people that are influencing you is really what we put in the family category. We actually have them score out from a 1 to 10 that relationship. And then the aggregate of all those scores ends up being your family score. So you may average a 6 points on your family score, and it's just an average out. But here's the key. What we do is we take any score that is a 6 or below, and we circle it with a red marker. And here's why. We want to get curious about why the score is what it is. And typically what we do is we look at the clients and say, okay, let's say they have 3 members of their family that score a 5 or under. And we'll just say, in the next 30 days, if you could move that 4 to a 5, what would that look like? And who is that individual? And again, I'm not sure that any of us have ever been asked to list out our family members and score our relationship with them. So there's really two pieces of that, though. One is, it's one thing to have a family member in your life, like the crazy uncle that we'll just make generic here, that you only see once or twice a year during a holiday, and a family member that you see frequently. So there is a margin in which we talk about it's very hard for you to have a healthy relationship with the crazy uncle that you only see twice a year. So it's probably not your biggest focus, but it's important. But really what we want to zero in on are those people that you see regularly. And is there an opportunity to grow those relationships that are scoring lower? And usually in our space, the husband and wife's relationship is like paramount, and then their children, and if their children are married, those that are married into the family. And that's where we end up spending most of our time. But family is so important, but we seldom think of it intentionally about how are our relationships in that space. So we went through faith, now we just hit family. The next one is finance, which, how many people just openly talk about where their finances are? Whether they're living paycheck to paycheck or whether they got a big bank account. That's a real intimate place to go. But what we really talk about there is budgeting. We are big fans of the Dave Ramsey work. Obviously, we don't agree with him 100% on everything. I don't even agree with myself 100% on everything. But what we're finding in working with families of wealth and influence is what we find in our normal conversation within our peer group, which is very few people actually do budgeting. They know what they're spending, but they don't really know what they're spending. And so they come to the end of the month or whatever, and they're wondering where their money went. And what we tell them generically, which is a Dave Ramsey statement that I can't quote perfectly, which is, what you want to get in a position to do is have you be able to tell your money where it's going versus your money telling you where you're going. And I think this is a huge gap in our culture. I feel like in high school and college, there needs to be courses on budgeting and financial literacy. And we have the pleasure of stepping into that space with our clients. And our clients have a ton of money, but it doesn't change the disciplines of what it means to budget. And it could be the difference between being able to give away $10,000 to $50,000 to a charity because you budgeted well, you can give more out, to not being able to give that just because the money just flew by on something that you didn't even realize was being allocated to. So finance is really a big deal. And we find that in the next gen space, we almost always, I'm talking about 90% of the time doing our client work, we get to dive into budgeting. And by the way, it is a blast. And if you're out there and you feel like you have good financial literacy, if you're involved with a community organization or a church, man, serve in that area because there's such a big need in our culture. Money drives everything. Where we believe faith should be driving everything, it ends up being money driving everything. So just a huge contrast and a huge need. The next one I think is pretty common in that we talk about our firm and our client's firm, and it's really the satisfaction you have or how you rate yourself in your own job. And to stereotype and be general, the guy is building the enterprise. So how are you scoring yourself in your job performance and even in your job satisfaction? And I think what is, I want to say it the right way, what is interesting for me as a guy, and a guy that's been married for almost 35 years, is hearing the wives of these very successful men downplay their role as the CEO of the home. And what really is the truth in the culture is the culture views it that same way. And that's why the female looks at their role at home. And what we try to do is amp that way up. What my wife, Jennifer, has done in raising our children alongside me, since I travel a lot, we've ran a large nonprofit, we run our own companies now. She was the backbone when I wasn't around. And I think, a big part of our culture doesn't understand that being the CEO of the home is massive. And we want to cheerlead that. And we've ended up in some incredible conversations. And I think I would just challenge everybody listening is, if you've got a dad or mom that's running a business or a wife, ask them about it. How are you feeling about it? Not just how you're feeling, but how do you really feel about it? And man, if you've got mom or a dad that gets to stay home and be the primary caregiver with the children, take the time to ask them how they're really doing. Because when we see scores of 3s and 4s, and these people are running on the husband side being generic, and they're running massive companies, we're going to have a very interesting conversation because the whole world looks at their wealth as how could they not be happy? How could they not score themselves high? Well, the curiosity will tell you why. And then same with the wife at home, again, stereotyping the role. And sometimes she's working in the family business and raising the kids at home. They don't get enough credit for the incredible job they do. And often they don't feel seen and they don't feel heard. In other words, they feel invisible because the spotlight is on the family brand all the time. And what's happening at home, really doing the most important thing, which is raising the children and raising the family, really should supersede the brand, right? But in our culture, it gets flipped. So that's the firm piece. And it is just, again, it is an honor and a privilege for Jennifer and I to step into these spaces. So then we move to fitness, which everybody always thinks is how many times they've worked out at the gym. And we go, no, 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 no. And we have a whole definition sheet that we work with our clients on. So we're all defining this stuff the same way. But it's really all about your 360 health. It's mental, emotional, physical. It's nutritional. It is working out, but it's also just dietary, right? And it's also how are you feeling in your headspace? How do you feel about yourself? So the fitness piece almost always gets overweighted to the physicality. And what we try to do is balance it out with, no, let's talk about your emotional health. Let's talk about, your nutrition. Let's talk about those different things. How do you even have this thing called self-care? One of the things that we find out across the board is the families we work with, which I believe is in pace with everyday America, we're all so busy, we don't even know how to spell self-care. We really don't. We may think, well, I'm going to eat healthy or go on the carnivore diet or the Daniel diet or whatever these diets are. But we're forgetting that there's so much more to this thing called fitness than just what we're eating or how many miles we run every day. All those are good, but there's just a lot more to it. And again, we get to go there with our clients. And then the surprise topic are really our last two. When we talk about friendships, not just casual, But who is there for you when nobody else is? Who can you have a conversation with and you know that conversation stays between the two of you? Who can you bare your soul to and even your greatest weaknesses and temptations to and know that the content is safe with them? That's a real friend. And I tell you, if we have a handful of those going through life, we're rich people. In the context of our professional work, here's one of the most basic questions that our clients ask or tend to filter everything through in the area of friendship. And that is, I wonder why that person wants to hang out with me. Great question. I wonder if they're going to pitch me something for my business. I wonder what their angle is. So Jennifer and I, again, sit in this space of wealth and influence. But I believe it's the same thing at the end of the day. Everybody asks is why somebody wants to be a friend of mine. And how much time am I willing to invest in that friendship if I'm not sure that it's real? So we may have a lot of acquaintances out there, but I'm going to guess that most of us have very few friends. And again, we get the honor and the privilege of helping our clients walk through that mental exercise and often very emotional exercise on a regular basis. And I think what's interesting is after all these years, nearly 12 years of doing this work, we've been able to go through some extreme highs with clients in their life and extreme lows. And when they hit those lows, those times of true need, they tend to talk about who was there for them. And boy, it's exciting when you see them start building their own filter on what works in the friendship space for them. But it's usually through a trial or a valley experience that those relationships get forged and welded together. So again, there's just story after story that maybe someday we'll share about some of those. But friendship, so important. And I think our call out to everybody is, how many real friends do you have? And how many friends do you have that you can really count on? And then the next one and the last one of the Life 7 F's is fun. And I think we greatly discount how God has wired us to enjoy life with others, be in relationship with others. And friends and fun are all about relationships, right? Whether it's in the context of having fun with your family, your children, your spouse, or if it's fun as it relates to your peer group, your friendship groups. And I think what happens in the space that Jennifer and I operate in, and again, I think it's so common in our culture, it's just not in the wealth influence space, and that is we tend to have fun at the very bottom of our priority list. Where if you don't have those moments, it's like watching a movie that's like intense all the time, and you're wore out after the movie. Where if you watch a movie and they have these intermittent comedy moments or fun moments, you come out of that movie and you actually feel energized and have laughter to it. So I think the comment around this area of fun is, one, don't discount it. Don't make it the last thing you think of every day. Move it up on your priority list. Two, don't just assume that people that have resources or influence have a lot of fun, because it really ratchets back up to their time with their family is limited, typically, and their friendship list is very small. So their opportunity to have this thing called fun is greatly limited just because of their chosen pace of life. So just in a real quick recap, Life's 7 F's. We hit these 7 areas: faith, family, finance, firm, your occupation, your fitness, overall health, friends, and fun. And if you can get your head and arms around that filter for your life and you start intentionally thinking through how you're doing in those areas, you're going to grow in ways that you've never dreamed you'd grow, just because you're thinking about those 7 areas of life that we call Life's 7 F's.